I'd like to introduce Maeve Marsden. Thank you for joining us today. And you've got to focus on LGBTQI plus and feminist storytelling, performance stuff. Now, I've got here that you are independent writer, producer, performer, freelance, precarious, fun, which you find fun and challenging, building a career for 8 to 10 years now.
Yeah.
You've performed Sydney Festival, at the Sydney Opera House, Adelaide Fringe, Melbourne Comedy Festival, Perth Fringe, Edinburgh Fringe, I think the Adelaide Cabaret Festival recently. I was surprised and delighted to see that you were a 2020 Philip Parsons Fellow.
Yeah.
The Emerging Writers, is that right? Emerging
Yeah,
Writers?
it's an early career playwrights program, that one. So there's 6 playwrights who are mentored over the course of a year whilst writing a play. And we've also got an emerging dramaturg, Sarah, who comes from a screen background. And so we all kind of work together as a group, obviously now more virtually than in person. And so I'm writing a play. So which is good timing during lockdown to be trying to write a play.
Well,
rather than
excellent.
touring a lot.
I mean, it wasn't my first question, but I'm curious about that because obviously with COVID-19, that's complete. I mean, has that changed how the Philip Parsons Fellow experience was going to be?
Yeah, so look, I mean, going back to the sort of list of a million things I do, which connects into the Philip Parsons stuff. I've been for about 10 years doing a lot of different jobs in the arts, and it's been a great way of making a career as an independent artist. Please excuse my dog's cameo behind me. Making a career as an independent artist work. The way I've managed to make that work is by doing everything, writing shows that I perform in, producing most of the tours. In some cases, I've worked with other producers, or we've had Anthony Williams direct a couple of our cabarets, but a lot of it's been small teams doing everything in order to make tours happen. And in that way, I've managed to make a living. So for the last 5 years, I haven't had a day job, you know. But now being kind of, I guess, mid-career rather than an emerging artist, I'm looking for opportunities to do one of my things at once. So instead of always being all in. So when I saw the Belvoir Fellowship advertised last year and saw that it was a lab, like a group rather than one individual playwright, I thought, well, I'm quite a collaborative person. Maybe I will appeal to them as someone who's got this background in working in these kind of group environments. And so I sent in one of my cabaret scripts, and our cabaret scripts are really quite theatrical. They're not sort of just spontaneous chat. Like, we really structure these shows out like a piece of theatre, and there's narrative to them. And so I submitted that, and I thought they might be like, cabaret, that's not theatre. But I got in, and so it's really beautiful chance to just focus on my writing. So to write something that I don't plan to perform in or direct or produce, that's a play rather than a cabaret, is a wonderful stretching of my skills, and a good project to be working on during lockdown. So we managed to get our first kind of retreat in before the lockdown, and everything else has been done over Zoom and email and phone calls in terms of feedback.
At the end of this, will you have a script? Like, is that the idea at the end of the year?
So the idea is at the end of the year, we do an internal showing of the work, and Belvoir considers it for programming. There's no obligation on them to program it, but if they don't, then we can take it and shop it around the other theatres. So mine, my first draft is a whole play, but it has some structural and character development issues that I'm working on. But, I'm happy with it as a first draft, but I'm hoping that by the next draft it's going to be better or at least more what I've set out to achieve. So it's a play about a lesbian family getting divorced, stuck in a house together, getting divorced over the course, spoiler alert, over the course of a year at this point in time. And so it's about the nuclear family and about the sort of traditions and institutions we uphold and how the nuclear family can play out in a queer setting and marriage. And
fantastic.
Okay.
Interesting. So that's, I probably should have held off on that question. I might come back to it again. I don't know. But I just maybe going back to because that was my first question to you as an independent artist. I mean, is that how you describe yourself?
An independent artist. Look, I find the what do I call myself task the hardest thing. And I think it's part of it is because of the way our industry is set up. In Australia, the size of the industry means that for so many of us, doing one thing in the arts is an impossibility, Some people get to be just playwrights or just directors, but that's not been something I can pull off. I do freelance writing, I do curate Queerstories, which is a sort of producer but creative role. I perform, and altogether it's a career. So independent artist makes sense, but that also takes away from a lot of the producing work I do, which whilst being creative is still admin and budgets and travel bookings. So I guess I'm a creative, or I'm an self-produced artist. I haven't nailed it. You think after 10 years I would have worked out what to call myself.
But it sort of suggests that actually you have many skills. I mean, they're quite strong things. Some people are only a writer because that's all they can do, but you, as I say, you do a range of things.
Jack of all trades, master of none, though, isn't it?
Oh, well,
I don't know. That's a pretty good writer. And I like to joke that I do cabaret because I wasn't funny enough to be a stand-up. I wasn't a good enough singer to be a full-time singer. I couldn't write songs, and I wasn't a very good actor, but I was okay at all of them. And put all those skills together. Is that where you got a cabaret? Is that what the beautiful cabaret? It's just perhaps disparaging to the fine art of cabaret. But no, look, I'm also quite an impatient person who gets bored of doing one thing all the time. So I think even if one element of my career grows, like if my writing grows after this play, or if I've been speaking to theatres about directing opportunities as part of this whole trying to do one thing at a time new life goal. But I think I'll always be a person who wants to do different things. I don't think I've just fallen into this portfolio career because I had to. It's my brain is activated by changing modes between different types of work, and it suits my personality that on a day I'm not feeling creative, I can do budgets and finance, and on a day that admin is unbearable to me, I can write. So I think I'll always do a mixed bag of things.
And do you think does that require a certain degree of discipline? Because they're very different things. Like you are saying you've had your head down writing, kind of immersed in the writing, but at the same time people are probably sending you emails about jobs and this and that and this.
I haven't nailed that. I haven't nailed the discipline. I'm trying to. It's the producer side of things is the easiest for me because it is so responsive. It's emails and banking and tasks that you can tick off a list, and that's really satisfying. Whereas creative work isn't that. You can't be like, tick, fix that scene, because you could always come back to it, and there's so much more nuance. So I haven't nailed that. And again, part of this goal I have of doing one thing at a time, which was weirdly a goal I'd set before we hit a pandemic. I'd said that this year was about getting people to trust in me doing one of my jobs, not all of them.
You created the pandemic. You created the pandemic.
I'm so sorry. I said I needed a break. Look, it was already a goal, and the pandemic has obviously really scaled. Well, it's removed my ability to do the performance stuff, and it's largely reduced my producing work. So as a result, I was able to spend more time on writing and kind of go deep in with my play. And I think the play will be better as a result. I hate to do that whole Shakespeare wrote King Lear in lockdown, but I think being locked in a house helped me write a play about a family being stuck together and trying to find a way to communicate with each other. So who knows? I don't know. I feel in a very strange place of not knowing what our industry or my career will look like next year or even next month. But at the moment, I'm trying to focus on the creative stuff while keeping some of the producing work bubbling away, because that is better for my income.
Yes. So we talked a little bit about Queerstories. So I know you've come to Riverside, I think the last 3 years with Queerstories, and you're producing a hybrid version now, just in the lockdown period. Can you talk? Is that? I mean, and that's been fantastic for you. That vehicle. How long have you been working Queerstories? I mean, you've got a book, you've got podcasts.
So I started doing it in 2015 in a City of Sydney program called Late Night Library. So there were really small free events at King's Cross Library. And that was when my producer brain kicked in and was like, oh, this has legs. People like this format of 6 storytellers sharing a personal story at each show. And so I started doing it monthly at the start of 2017. So that's coming up to 4 years. Yeah, that's right. By the end of this year. And look, it does a lot for me, Queerstories. It's great for my producing work because it's so regular and it has now become national. So I do events at writers' festivals. I do monthly in Melbourne when we can travel. I do twice a year in Brisbane. I've done lots of regional events with it. Sorry, my dog is trying to get me to throw a ball for her. And yeah, published a book and there's a podcast. And so at the moment, the adaptation that I'm doing is commissioning stories from the podcast, and luckily was able to get some funding for that. That won't be necessarily performed live, and doing small live events in Sydney. So I'm doing events for 30 people at a time on the 18th of July and live streaming one of those shows. And I was really resistant to the live streaming with Queerstories because I feel like I have a podcast, so there's already a way of getting the stories online.
Absolutely.
But once we started talking about doing live shows again, and I realised that was a way to reach my audience in other places, as well as, please, sorry about the noise of the bouncing ball, as well as filming the Auslan interpreters for access, I decided that my resistance to live streaming was silly when that was a win to do it that way. So we'll see how Saturday goes. By the time this comes out, it might have happened and it might have been a wild success or a terrible disaster. But until we know when theatre's going to be able to fully reopen, I guess everyone's finding ways to adapt. And Queerstories has my biggest kind of audience, and in lots of ways is the easiest thing to remount because there's not sets and travel. I can do it in Sydney and one person on stage at a time, or two with the Auslan interpreter.
And do you have a sense, like, I mean, it sounds like your instincts are to run with the opportunity. So Queerstories, 4 years it's been running. Do you see it just continuing on indefinitely, or
I mean, the audience appetite for it has been so strong and so consistent. You know, I haven't had to pay for marketing for most of those events, and I've done upwards of, it's more than 50, I don't know, we'd be edging towards 100 events now. Not quite that many, but yeah, somewhere in the middle there. And there's not a lack of really great queer writers. So I think if the audience appetite for it goes away, I'll stop doing it. But as long as people want to gather together and listen to stories, and, you know, stand-up comedy hasn't died, and it's essentially, you know, it's storytelling and it's human, and I make choices that I think help audiences come back. I don't book a lot of the same performers over and over again. You really are getting new stories a lot of the time. And I'm lucky, my community really likes a social gathering. They like getting together. So there's that element of it as well.
Yeah.
For me, what I want to happen with it is for me to be able to now start converting its reputation and audience into it being more of a platform for new writing. So I've started chatting to people, like taking the stories and pitching for screen funding to adapt some of the stories into films, or taking the stories and chatting to theatre companies about whether one of them should be adapted into a production. So trying to see, well, what can this now do for these writers and for the prevalence of queer work on stage and screen in Australia. That's my kind of next goal with it, is less about what the audience sees and more about what I can do behind the scenes
to
with queer
produce
writing.
artists.
Yeah, to produce or to just make the intro so that it's a platform, so that people go, wow, I can test out a little story here, and if it's got legs, I could then develop it into something else. Because I suppose I'm an artist first and foremost, and rather than someone who makes community events, which can be both. And so I'm interested in the artistry. Some of these stories, like in 10 minutes, a whole little world gets made. Some of my favourite ones I can listen to and read over and over again. And I'd love to see some of these little narratives be developed into other kinds of new work. So that would be my goal of what I'd like to do with it next. But yeah, I mean, queer arts and culture isn't going anywhere, and I suppose I find new audience and new people coming to it the more I do them. I hope by next year I'll be able to do regular live events again. We'll see.
Question, I sort of looked at some of your shows. So Mother's Ruin, a cabaret about Jim. We've talked about Queerstories, Fat Musicals, a body of work, which we were hoping to get to Riverside, which fell over this year.
Hopefully
but
next year.
We'll get you back next year for sure. So were you and Libby, are you the two writer? Are you the writer? Or how's that? How does that
all work?
Yeah.
It's sort of
and
a
I'm going
bit
to ask
different.
you, I'm just going to sort of throw in political
No,
theatre.
go.
Political theatre. Would you also,
Political
is that a
theatre.
label you would connect with these types of
So there's two things. The writing process on each of those shows was a bit different. Mother's Ruin was more collaborative, though I was kind of the lead writer, but we researched and did a lot of kind of workshopping it together. And it, evolved a lot over the years that we've been touring it. Fat Musicals was much more Libby and I in a room together, and so the dialogue in it is much less sort of source material. Mother's Room was about researching history, and this one is quite a lot about our friendship and about our kind of personalities and politics. So that one was more Libby and I. But I tend to kind of be the one who sits and wrangles the scripts, so takes them away from rehearsals and takes what we've done and shuffles and pulls it into gear. But look, political theatre, I feel like if I call my shows, even Queerstories, if I call them political, then it sets up an expectation for me that they're going to be didactic, that they're trying to impart a moral or a lesson in a particular way that I'm really averse to. I like to think that my shows are entertaining and engaging, and because I'm interested in politics and history, and because, I talk about feminism and queerness and class and all the kind of issues that come up, and bodies in Fat Musicals, those are the ideas I choose to be entertaining about. Which maybe sounds like I'm kind of dodging, but it's why I think people come back to my work. I think people come back to Queerstories because it's entertaining. And if I decided that it was a political or a community-driven work or project, it would start to get lectury, and it would start to be awareness training. And for me, it's always got to be about story and entertainment first. If a political idea isn't delivered in a way that's engaging or poetic or funny or surprising, it's not right for my work. It's a political speech, and that can happen at a rally, or there's a place for political speeches, and people who are able to write and deliver them are magnificent. But I always try to go with the entertainment and the art and the humour first, and it just so happens that I'm interested in politics. It's sort of circular, but it's the way I have to think about my work, so I don't get self-important, and so that it continues to be interesting to audiences, I guess. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, brilliant. No, I thought that was a brilliant answer. And, and I think I was very conscious in drafting my questions about labels, and not wanting to. So I think all my questions were, do you use this label? Because sometimes labels can be handles. But I think your answer is beautiful.
But also even the politics in like Mother's Ruin and Fat Musicals is so gentle as well. So I also feel like when people are making work that really challenges people and is really like confronting and out there, and our stuff is like pretty gentle feminism and pretty gentle body positivity, I feel like calling it political work, you'd come and be like, is that all? Don't be mean to fat people. That's not that outrageous. And so it's also about not setting up false expectations of how revolutionary what I do is. It's not. It's based in kind of joy and warmth and a progressive ideal, but it's not like confronting, I don't think. Maybe my future work will be, but it's not at the moment.
Not at the moment.
We probably need a revolution, so I should pivot.
Now, okay, I'm conscious of your time. I wanted you to get back to your writing. So I've got 4 quick questions to ask you. We're asking everyone. Why do you do what you do?
It's the best combination of the things I'm good at, and I derive great joy from the audience artwork connection. So I never tire of trying to understand and connect to audiences in various ways. I don't tire of it. It doesn't bore me. And I suppose I'm greatly averse to boredom. And so, a constant sense of the possibility of joy and connection, and not being very good at other jobs.
Brilliant. Okay. And what was the last live performance you saw?
I saw Fuck Fabulous at Mardi Gras. That's the last super memorable one, which is Sarah Ward's incredible variety kind of cabaret artistry brilliance, which was on at the Seymour Centre as part of Mardi Gras in February. Because early March I was doing shows, so I wasn't able to watch as many. And it was brilliant. It reignited my excitement about cabaret in Australia, which I think in some ways has become very commercial. And hers was just fierce and weird and wonderful. And I was so disappointed that their tour got cancelled because of the pandemic, and I hope it gets up again because it was magnificent.
What is your favourite Riverside moment?
Yeah, doing Queerstories at Riverside is always really beautiful. I feel terrible singling out like individual stories because it's like all my children. I can't have a favourite child. I mean, one comes to mind from the last event of Liam Benson telling a beautiful story about his kilt and swishing his kilt and the audience just going off for that. We did a super hilarious and weird Spice Girls sing-along at Riverside a while ago and just had such a fun crowd, and that one was really joyful. But all of the Queerstories stories that I've hosted at Riverside, I've really, really enjoyed. And it's lovely. The audience interactions I have there are great because they're people who aren't necessarily travelling in for the Redfern shows, and I get to have a chat and we talk about kind of I think there was a women's like ukulele group, and I had a long chat to the women who run that, and they'd all come together, and different like queer young people from Western Sydney who were really stoked that the event had been put on in Parramatta. That's not a quick answer, but all of it, like the coming together of community and of doing the shows in Parramatta is always joyful.
Excellent. Okay, last question. What are you binging on right now? It could be TV, it could be a novel, it could be food, anything. What are you binging on?
What am I binging on right now? I've found concentrating quite hard, but I have been, like during all of this, I'm sort of binging on the news and Twitter, but I've just started watching Battlestar Galactica, the series from like 20 years ago. And it's just a lovely departure from reality. Like a bit of sci-fi at the moment is just, it's like, close down Twitter and the news and watch people in spaceships shitting robots.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you for your time. Thanks, so fantastic to catch up with you. And I
hope that's useful.
Yeah, great. I look forward to having you out at Riverside sometime soon, hopefully.
Sometime.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, mate.
See ya.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.